In the last lesson, I recounted how the last Muslim empire and the last pretense of Muslim unity ended in 1922. It traumatized the Muslim world. But that Humpty Dumpty could not be put back together again. Muslim political leaders and thinkers would need to come up with a new idea. Their response was to imagine how Muslim societies could adapt to the modern world of nation states by creating authentically Islamic nations. With the old hereditary concepts of leadership gone, Muslim scholars and politicians looked back to Islamic law to find an authentically Islamic basis for choosing leaders. And within the rapidly emerging need for new laws, they sought to define the institutions, the authentically Islamic institutions, that could both interpret traditional Islamic law and replace the lawmaking power formerly held by kings and caliphs. Their thoughts crystallized around the concept of an Islamic State, and that's where it begins. In Pakistan and later Iran, national constitutions, real constitutions, were written to specifically create Islamic states. These states claim Islamic legitimacy on the basis of being established in divine law, so-called Sharia. Yet they also claim to be both democratic and to recognize full human rights for those living within them, and to be full partners in the international world, that world order embodied by the United Nations. But two problems have followed. First, there are characteristics of these Islamic states that fit poorly with modern concepts of democracy and human rights. In both Pakistan and Iran, religious minorities and political dissidents are regularly and legally persecuted. There is no concept in these contemporary Islamic states of political equality for religious minorities or of real freedom of speech. This is because under classical Islamic law, religious minorities were tolerated, but were not necessarily respected and definitely had no political rights. And Sharia never assumed the right of free political speech if it undermined the ruler or threatened conventional religious thinking. The second problem is that most Muslims do not live in explicitly Islamic states. Instead, they live under governments that are to some extent shaped on Western secular models. In most of the Muslim world, these states are authoritarian dictatorships, making little pretense of being fully democratic. Not surprisingly, this has led to the rise of revolutionary groups claiming that by establishing a real Islamic State, they will bring political liberation, at least to the Muslim majority. Even in countries like Indonesia or the Philippines that are much more democratic than many places in the Muslim world, there exist repressed Muslim groups who see in an Islamic State a better opportunity than the current political order that they're living in, which is, and has been at least, authoritarian. As a result, at the end of the 20th century, the Muslim world was far from being a world of Islamic states and a larger world of nation states, as scholars had imagined. Instead, much of the Muslim world was in political turmoil and civil war, as Islamist groups fought established rulers for control. And it may be fairly said that at least among Muslim intellectuals, political scientists, and even political leaders across most of the Muslim world, the idea of building Islamic states was waning rapidly. After all, neither Pakistan nor Iran had been a notable political success, and they were the best of what was a pretty bad lot. The experiment in forming Islamic states by the end of the 20th century was a failure. So a new idea has arisen, promoted by politicians in a number of the more successful dominantly Muslim nations. And this is the idea of an Islamic society rather than an Islamic state. An Islamic society, as understood by Muslims as diverse as Tariq Ramadan, Anwar Ibrahim, and Rahid Ghanouchi, is not defined by implementation of classical Islamic law, although aspects of it might be implemented. An Islamic society is defined as a society built on what might be called an Islamic ethic or Islamic principles. In a society with a majority of Muslims, democratic institutions should ensure that the laws reflect Muslim values. But even where Muslims are a minority, they may share common values with Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, and others. So that whatever laws are enacted finally, the society could be said to be an Islamic society in the broadest sense of the word. And that could be true even if Muslims were a minority. This concept of an Islamic society has been advanced by political parties in countries as diverse as Tunisia, Turkey, Malaysia, Indonesia, parts of the Philippines. It is also widely discussed and even accepted widely by Muslim minorities living in the West, and Tariq Ramadan has written about the Muslim minorities in Europe, he being a European. It appears to me that this concept of an Islamic society is not only gaining ground among Muslims, but promises a much more fruitful form of political relationships between the dominantly Muslim states and their non-Muslim minorities and the rest of the world. When, in 2016, Muslim leaders across the globe agreed in Marrakesh to pursue new understandings of the political rights of religious minorities in Muslim-majority states, they took a huge step in moving away from the concept of an Islamic state based in Sharia law to that of an Islamic society based in a democracy built on shared values and principles. And I would add, for those of us who are Christians, it might be worth thinking about how our societies could be Christian societies without having to be Christian states. Perhaps democracy, working through different religions that share common values, could result in societies that are simultaneously and genuinely Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, Hindu, Buddhist, Jain. These would be societies that are both religious and religiously diverse. For more on contemporary Islam, keep watching this YouTube channel. Look forward to seeing you again. Thanks.